Today on Ag News Daily.
We have so many few days we can actually spray anymore. It's just because of the wind, the environment, the rain, all those things. When they need to run, they need to be able to run and run with confidence. And not that we've tested every possible combination, but we've really tried to make sure that this product works well across all the systems out there.
Well, welcome back to a weekly edition of the Ag News Daily podcast. Delaney Howell joined remotely today by Michelle Stangler. Josie is headed back to school. It's Iowa State Fair. Minnesota State Fair, I think, starts. The Wisconsin State Fair, is that coming up as well? And Farm Progress Show. We've got a lot of different events coming up here over the next few weeks.
Yeah, we're in progress at the Wisconsin State Fair. A lot happening there. Maybe a little rain, but heard some great things happening there. Of course, all the kids showing and different auctions that are happening there too.
Yeah, I'm heading to the Iowa State Fair tomorrow for an energy/agriculture day at the fair. Not fully sure what to expect, but I suspect that I'll have some content to share with our listeners on the podcast next week.
Great. That'll be fun to see.
Absolutely. And then Farm Progress Show is right around the corner, Michelle. So action-packed here before harvest gets started. Weather's going to be top of mind, though, as we get through the next few weeks, especially because the El Nino pattern is continuing to develop in the Corn Belt, with active rounds of rain and severe weather expected to continue through to the weekend. While moisture is helping corn and soybeans throughout this critical stage of development, rainfall has been hit or miss in quite a few areas, especially parts of the southern plains. Missouri and southern Illinois have also been hotter and drier. DTN's meteorologist John Baranek says that soybeans are especially in need of some moisture in those areas as they work to fill pods, while corn is moving through to the kernel fill stage. He also says that active patterns could continue through late August, with some potential for rain to reach those drought-stressed areas further north. The heat story is much different across the south and southern plains, where hot, muggy conditions are expected to persist and dry areas could stay dry. Baranek says the El Nino condition is also bringing some benefits to the western states by boosting this summer monsoon, but the southern plains remain a concern. Looking further ahead, forecasters are watching a record pace El Nino and what it could mean for the weather into fall and harvest season.
Well, looking into crop progress conditions, the latest crop readings are mostly steady to lower following another week of wide range weather across key growing regions. Corn held at 61% good to excellent, with 94% silking, 61% in the dough stage, and 16% dented. Soybeans slipped 1 point to 62% good to excellent, with 93% silking and 74% setting pods. Here on spring wheat, though, saw the largest decline among the major crops, down 4 points to 51% good to excellent, while 24% has been harvested ahead of that 5-year average.
Well, Michelle, the Senate Farm Bill remains stalled this week, with Democrats opposing the Republican proposal over changes to the SNAP cost-sharing requirements. Senate Agriculture Chairman John Boozman says he plans to bring the same bill back for another vote when the committee reconvenes in September after the measure failed to advance last week. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, the committee's ranking Democrat, says she remains committed to reaching an agreement with Boozman, but wants a 2-year delay before states and counties take on more responsibility for SNAP costs. Republicans have offered a 1-year delay, but Senator Chuck Grassley says another 1-year Farm Bill extension could be needed if the committee can't reach a bipartisan agreement. Farm aid and year-round E15 are also tied to separate legislative efforts moving through Congress. Senator Grassley says he expects about $12 billion in additional farm aid to move forward as part of a military spending package, while another budget includes about $10 billion in farm aid, but does not include E15. An Iran war supplemental package could also provide an opportunity to advance year-round E15. Klobuchar continues to support permanent year-round E15 and says she will continue working with Senator Boozman on the Farm Bill, amongst other issues.
A lot of potential paths. We'll continue to share it here on Ag News Daily, as I know that E15 has been certainly a 2026 theme of what can that look at the federal level. Canadian and U.S. trade officials, continuing on that policy front, are working to avoid a new round of tariffs set to take effect August 19th here in just a few days. Canadian Minister for U.S. Trade Relations Dominic LeBlanc met with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer this week on Tuesday, marking the third meeting between trade officials from the two countries in 3 weeks. President Donald Trump has proposed 50% tariffs on nearly $20 billion in Canadian imports, including some products previously exempt from the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. For U.S. farmers and ranchers here, the negotiations are important because Canada is a major market for American agriculture products. Just a reminder there, as we've shared it here on Ag News Daily. Canadian officials have indicated they could offer concessions on some U.S. trade concerns in exchange for dropping the proposed tariffs. If the new tariffs take effect, they could raise costs, disrupt established trade flows, and potentially affect demand for U.S. commodities, something we're continuing to watch here as those trade conversations continue here in 2026. Certainly a theme is trade.
Well, another theme has always been labor, and we're seeing more farmers, of course, rely on H-2A workers, and they're now facing potentially higher federally mandated wage rates under the latest adverse effects wage rates, also known as AWER, I think is how you would say that acronym. Cameron Castillo, an associate economist with the American Farm Bureau Federation, says wages are increasing in nearly every state, with Kansas, North Dakota, and Nebraska among those seeing increases of around 20% from last year. The AWER is set annually by the Department of Labor based on its Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Survey, with rates varying, of course, by state and territory. Castillo says Congress could provide more stability for farm employers by limiting how much the wage rate can increase from one year to the next. The Securing Agricultural Workforce Act, backed by the House Agriculture Committee Chairman G.T. Thompson, would cap the annual AWER increases to about 3.25%. Castillo says that cap could have significantly limited the increases facing some of those employers in states such as Kansas, Nebraska, and North Dakota. So we'll see how that story continues to unravel, but we'll be back with more news right after this short break.
Farming comes with trade-offs. An extra pass means dinner in the cab. An early morning becomes a late night. Unnecessary restrictions turn into headaches. But when you make Enlist herbicides the foundation of your herbicide program, the trade-offs will be in your favor. Effective weed control that's ready to work when you are. Flexible tank makes options and neighbor-friendly applications, all without the need to jump through hoops. See what you'll gain with America's most trusted herbicide system protecting your Enlist E3 soybean fields at Enlist.com.
Looking in some land news, a lot of reports and some ideas here that was shared in the past few weeks by various organizations. Farmland values continue to climb, although the pace of increases is slowing, according to a report released last week. Danny Munch, an economist with the American Farm Bureau Federation, says the average value of U.S. farm real estate, including land and buildings, increased 3.4% to $4,500 an acre in 2026. Cropland values rose 3.3% to just over $6,000 an acre, while pastureland increased 4.2%. He says farm real estate values are up 44% since 2020, but annual increases have cooled significantly from the double-digit gains seen earlier in the decade. Higher land values can strengthen the balance sheets of farmers and ranchers who own property by increasing equity and collateral for borrowing, he says. But Munch says those gains come with challenges for beginning farmers, producers looking to expand, and renters who face higher costs without gaining equity. Competition from commercial and residential development, renewable energy projects, outside investors, and recreational or rural residential demand is also putting pressure on agricultural land, potentially removing more acreage from production over the long term.
Well, as we continue talking about farmland, lease options are an interesting topic as well. There is no single lease arrangement today that consistently delivers the highest returns for farmland owners and operators, according to some new analysis from Purdue University. Michael Langmeyer, director of the Purdue Center for Commercial Agriculture, says crop share, fixed cash rent, and flexible cash rent each carry different levels of risk and reward. Fixed cash rent has provided the most stability, while crop share and flexible cash rent have tended to see bigger swings depending on commodity prices and market conditions. Crop share leases can outperform fixed cash rent when markets are strong, but they also carry more downside risk when margins tighten. Flexible cash rent falls somewhere in between, offering some potential upside while providing more stability than crop share. Langmeyer says the best option ultimately depends on each operation's risk tolerance and whether the terms of a flexible lease allow bonus payments to kick in.
Really looking here at the bigger picture of land, more than 150 million acres of U.S. farmland could change hands over the next 10 to 20 years, creating one of the largest generational transfers of agricultural land in the country's history. The American Farmland Trust estimates more than 40% of U.S. farmland could transition to new owners as aging landowners retire. With the average U.S. producer now over 58 and many farmland owners 65 or older, more farms are approaching to this transition point. As the farmland passes to heirs, some of whom may not farm, ownership can become divided among multiple family members. They mention some tips. Without a plan, they can lead to disputes, forced land sales, or fragmentation of an operation. They say that estate planning tools such as trusts, LLCs, and buy-sell agreements can help determine who owns and manages land while protecting its long-term value. But communication is just as important, and starting these conversations early can help families preserve both their farm and their wealth for the next generation. So some great stories there from All About Lands.
Well, China has stepped up to purchase more U.S. soybeans, with USDA reporting Chinese purchases of 238,000 metric tons of U.S. soybeans last week. That puts purchases roughly 1/4 of the way toward a commitment from China to buy at least 25 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans annually through 2028. The Trump administration has also said that China has agreed to purchase at least $17 billion in additional agricultural products each year. Traders are, of course, watching closely for more trade signals ahead of an expected Trump-Xi Jinping meeting in September coming up. And China has also announced new legal and trade measures targeting the U.S., including tighter export reviews and sanctions against several American entities. While those actions do not specifically target agriculture, changes in the broader trade relationship could influence soybean demand, commodity prices, and export planning for U.S. farmers.
Looking at some data recently released, U.S. beef exports were slightly lower by volume in June, but export value climbed to $790 million, according to the U.S. Meat Export Federation. President Dan Hellstrom says Taiwan remains an important market, with strong demand extending beyond premium cuts to less utilized products such as rounds, chuck rolls, and short plates. He says that broad demand is helping support the value of U.S. beef exports. Demand is also growing in Latin America, particularly the Dominican Republic, where U.S. beef is gaining ground in the expanding modern retail sector. While the loss of China as a major market has reduced overall export volume, Hallstrom says the higher value of shipments to other markets shows the benefits of diversifying U.S. beef exports.
Well, Michelle, the USDA says a new Texas facility designed to produce sterile flies for New World Screwworm control will open in the spring of 2027, earlier than previously expected. The facility is expected to produce 100 million sterile flies per week by the end of 2027, increasing to as many as 300 million weekly by the end of 2028. Experts estimate roughly 500 million sterile flies are needed to push screwworm populations south toward the Darien Gap, a natural barrier between Central and South America. The accelerated timeline comes after the first U.S. infestation of New World Screwworm in 3 decades was detected, of course, earlier this year, in Texas. USDA and the Department of Homeland Security are also expanding their resources and response through a biosecurity agreement. The agencies plan to use unmanned aircraft, artificial intelligence, and real-time data sharing to strengthen screening and respond to agricultural threats, including screwworm. And just as an interesting side note, Michelle, I have found it fascinating on especially our TikTok channel when we post about New World Screwworm. There are a lot of comments on those reels with a lot of interesting opinions as it relates to New World Screwworm and the sterile fly population.
I haven't had the conversation yet, but to hear what was New World Screwworm when it was eradicated quite a few years ago, I can only imagine those producers have a lot of stories to tell. So yeah, definitely a lot of engagement there talking about New World Screwworm. But another thing that we talked about earlier in the show that's expanding a little more about is dryness. July runoff in the Missouri River Basin above Sioux City, Iowa, totaled 2 million acre feet, or 61% of average, according to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Runoff was below normal to well below normal in the Fort Peck, Garrison, and Ojai reaches, while conditions were better farther downstream. The basin's 2026 runoff forecast remains at 15.4 million acre feet, or 60% of average, which would rank as the 11th lowest runoff on record if realized.
We had several major agribusiness companies release their 2026 earnings outlook, pointing to stronger demand across key crop markets and improved processing margins. ADM increased its full-year profit forecast after better than expected quarterly results, saying higher grain prices encouraged farmers to move stored corn and soybeans, boosting deliveries to ethanol plants and soybean processors. Corteva also raised its earning outlook, citing solid demand for seed products as farmers continue shifting acreage towards soybeans, although it says farm income remains under pressure from mixed commodity prices. Bayer also reported an unexpected increase in quarterly profit, helped by stronger seed technology sales there as well. The stronger outlook points to solid demand across several areas of the ag sector, even as farmers continue to navigate higher production costs and uncertain commodity markets.
Well, in this week's interview, we're talking all about weed management. It remains an important part of protecting soybean yield specifically, and Corteva has announced a new herbicide designed to help farmers tackle that challenge. Our team was able to catch up with Eric Scherder at Corteva's Summer Media Day just a few short weeks ago to learn more about this new product.
Well, Corteva had some big news here recently, launching the new Enclosa soybean herbicide. We're with Eric Scherder of Corteva Agriscience to talk about that. And I loved, Eric, at the Corteva Media Days, the way that you launched the new Enclosa herbicide. We're part of the N crowd,
That's right.
Which I think we'll talk about a little bit more later on, just the different products that fit within that system. But what an exciting announcement. Talk to us a little bit about the work that goes into launching a new herbicide like this.
Well, with any new product you launch, whether it's a herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, it really doesn't matter. You got to understand what your customers are looking for, what you're trying to achieve, and can you deliver it in a solution that is going to provide value. And we tried to do that. We've done that with Inversa, which is a product we're kind of piggybacking off of a little bit here. With that encapsulated acetochlor, we've sold out. I mean, the uptick of that product in 1 year has been phenomenal. I mean, just a lot of value we're bringing with less crop response, that group 15 residual with acetochlor. But what we also heard our customers indicate is they'd like a little bit more residual activity on some larger seeded broadleaves. And that's where we bring in that chloranthalam. So we got two different modes of action there. Is chloranthalam new? By no means. We've typically used it in other products, but those were dries. And you think about today's farmers, they're getting more and more acres. They're more really adapted to liquid systems. They want that liquid system because it's just easier for them, especially when they're trying to get 400 or 500 acres a day if they can. Well, this gives them that liquid ZC formulation. And
what does ZC mean?
Oh, it's an alphabet soup game we play at times. ZC. So think about this way, Dwayne. Oil and water, just they don't mix. So how do we get two different or dissimilar things to play well in a tank and behave the way we want it to? In this case, we're having a capsule suspension, so something encapsulated. In this case, acetochlor with a suspension concentrate of that chloranthalam. Well, it's great to get them to play together, but they've got to be shelf life stable for up to 2 years. They've got to handle well for a grower. They don't want to have to mix it every 10 minutes. All those things that maybe we don't think about, but growers have to experience. We want them to have a good user experience. And that's what we've been able to deliver with that ZC formulation.
Yeah, and the commercialization process for new chemistry like this takes years in the making because you have to take in grower feedback. You have to do all the testing. You mentioned the 2-year shelf life. I'm sure that was part of the testing process as well. How long did it take to get this commercialization?
Even on a product where we know the attributes very well, which we know both these actives very well, it still will take us 5 to 6 years because you're going to have, by the time you're do what we call a beta testing, looking at formulations. You can develop a lot of different formulations of the same product, and some just don't deliver for whatever reason. We're different solvents, different suspension agents, surfactants, all those things. But then once you got to get your weed control data, make sure the crop safety data, and once you get all that kind of done, then you submit for the EPA, and then you add another 2 years, and it just takes a while to bring out a new product.
It's a lot, but it's very exciting. I think
Yes.
growers are going to react really favorably to this. How do you look at Enclosa and the benefits it brings versus some of the others, Enlist products, your Inversa product? How does it compare to the rest of the portfolio?
So when I think about, when you think about the soybean market in general, when you're down south, and I'm calling the mid-south, that southeast, they're farming the weed spectrum, time of year, there's just different growing aspects there versus, say, a farmer in Iowa versus someone in Pennsylvania versus someone in Dakotas. Different weeds, different things. The folks down south, what they really want is they want Enclosa Pre. And they want that tank mix compatibility with products like metribuzin, sulfentrazone, flumioxin. So they want to be able to really mix their own a little bit to meet the weed spectrum. For us in the Midwest, we're planting a lot of our beans early. We're planting beans, putting wool coats on them and put them in the ground, and they come up 21 days later. Well, because of the seed treatments and a lot of the advancements in genetics, we get really good stands, but we need our premium residuals there. So we're still going to stick with Kyber Pro and Sonic Boom, some of those products to give us that 6 to 8 weeks of residual. But where this product really comes into is for that grower that wants that in the Enlist weed control system. They still want Enlist 1. They're maybe using a glufosinate or glyphosate, depending on their system, but they need more in-season residual, and they want it a little bit broader spectrum. They want more of that larger shaded broadleaf aspects there on top of what Inversa was delivering. That's where Enclosa comes in. It gives them more options, more residual activity to really get them to canopy closure.
And you mentioned the tank mixing. I think that's a really important point I want to make sure we touch on a bit more, because tank mixing, compatibility, agitation, all of those were things that we talked about at the Corteva Media Day. Walk us through how a grower may use this product and why that is such an important component.
So, when you think about how we're farming today, we say it's maybe just 2 actives, but there might be, more likely could be AMS, there could be a micronutrient in there, there will be a surfactant in there, maybe a drift agent in there, another product. Next thing you know, you got 7, 8 different products. And not always does all that play well together. So that's why we have a lot of testing we do with our formulation group. We purposely try to really put it through the paces and do everything, I want to say, wrong to find out where's the break points, so that when a grower is, and as we all know, we have so many few days we can actually spray anymore. It's just because of the wind, the environment, the rain, all those things. When they need to run, they need to be able to run and run with confidence. And not that we've tested every possible combination, but we've really tried to make sure that this product works well across all the systems out there. And we've got to some 10-way combinations. It's just like we put a splash of water in the tank and here we go.
That's great. So up to 10 different combinations?
Yes.
Is that what okay.
Well, because you start thinking about, for our post-market, we could have an insecticide, a fungicide, Enlist 1, glufosinate, AMS, Enclosa, a drift agent, if they want to add that in, maybe a couple surfactants. Well, that's 8 or 9 right there alone. And that's not even uncommon.
Yeah, and it makes sense. You're trying to maximize every pass you make in the field. So
yes,
I think it's reassuring to hear that Corteva has that in mind when they're testing
We're
these
thinking
products.
about it. Again, we've not tested every combination out there, but we know going in, for most growers, that's $8 to $10 an acre just for your application costs. Whether growers want to admit that to themselves if they're doing their own spraying, that's still their time, their labor, their wear and tear, and all their machinery. That's still probably $7, $8 an acre. Most applicators are about 10. Well, if we can cut one pass out, that's a full bushel almost anymore, right there in savings, right there for that customer.
So, Eric, as we think about the commercialization and when this will be available for growers, you announced it at the 2026 Media Days. Is it going to be commercially available?
Yes. So we'll start selling here in Q4 2026 to be utilized next year for 2027. So the folks down south will use it more than likely pre. They might use it post, and then most of our Midwest, northern customers will probably be doing that early post application in soybean.
Such an exciting time. I think a lot of soybean growers are going to be excited to hear this news. Is there anything, Eric, we missed that's important for them to know about?
No, when I think, especially as we go into 2027, we fully realize the economy is going to be a tough environment. Growers are always looking for ways in areas that can shave a cost. And that's important. We got to be very mindful of our dollars. But generally speaking, if you start to shave your residuals and start shaving some of those costs out, you're going to spend proportionally more dollars trying to go after a bad decision, at least in weed control. Plus you got another $10 application cost there. So by spending a little bit of money up front on your residuals, not backing them down, you can really have a very successful weed control program and save yourself money going long term. I know that's easy to say on this side of the fence, but I think a lot of growers that have done that this year will realize that was a really good decision, and I didn't waste my money, and I've got good clean fields optimizing that yield.
Fantastic, Eric. Well, before I let you go, if any of our listeners have more questions about Enclosa, where can they go learn about it?
One, always talk to your local Corteva sales rep, because they're the person that knows your local farming practices better than I do sitting here in Johnson, Iowa today, how you're going to use it, the trends, that things, or reach out to your Corteva trusted retail partner. Those are the folks, again, boots on the ground there, or visit us at corteva.us/Enclosa. They can find more information there, or just any of our products in general.
Fantastic, Eric. Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Sure enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, Delaney, we appreciate you hearing all about this new herbicide and talking to the Corteva team, and our intern was there. So what a fun day our team had there. But talking a little bit about a fertilizer update. Fertilizer and diesel prices remain elevated as farmers make fall input decisions for the 2027 crop. USDA data analyzed by the University of Illinois shows anhydrous ammonia average just over $915 per ton on August 7th, up 16% from a year ago, while DAP averaged just over $912, up 7%. Potash was more stable at about $500 per ton, while Illinois diesel prices climbed back to $4.65 a gallon after falling below $4 earlier this summer. University of Illinois researchers suggest farmers consider diversifying those fertilizer purchases, reviewing application rates, and using soil tests and maximum return to nitrogen recommendations as they manage higher input costs. I know we talked about it all summer and I feel like all year, but gas prices and diesel prices, they are still at that high rate of, found at the pump.
Absolutely, they still are, and commodity prices are still trying to find their footing after Wednesday's WASDE report. A lot of headlines coming out of that report that sparked some excitement in the market, so let's chat a little bit about that. As we looked from analysts' reactions, they viewed the report as generally supportive or bullish for corn, with a slightly more neutral to bearish outlook for soybeans. Following the report, corn futures rallied while soybean gains had happened earlier in the trading section started to fade. When we look at some of those specific results, the USDA lowered the 26-27 yield forecast to about a 180, just over a 180 yield, but they raised harvested acres, kind of neutralizing that piece of the puzzle. But they also reflected stronger exports, which pushed ending stocks lower. In fact, tighter ending stocks, they used a 10.1% ratio for that. And really what the market is looking for here is less than 10% stocks to use ratio. That's when the market could start to get a little wild, get a little fireworks underneath it. So a lot of farmers I've been seeing online and just chatting with here over the last couple of days after that report was released are a little optimistic about what's ahead here for corn futures, especially as we think about that tighter stocks to use ratio. On the soybean side of things, harvested acres increased about 1.4 million acres, while yield was also slightly lowered there. Production rose overall, but ending stocks are also showing increased as exports were unchanged and crush demand was raised. Wheat production and ending stocks were lowered just slightly, while global wheat stocks increased from July, and globally 2026-2027 global corn stocks declined. Wheat stocks increased and soybean stocks were unchanged, while Brazilian's corn and soybean production estimates increased, but Argentina's estimates declined. So a lot of good analysts posting some stuff this week. I always love looking at Karen Braun's X account when that WASDE report comes out. She does a great job of breaking down just what that report meant. And we like to share some of those things here on the podcast as well. But that's it for this week's podcast. You can find us on all major social media platforms: Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and X. But with that, Michelle, what do you say we let the people go?
Let's let them go.